and I brought my daughter there so I could raise her to that kind of development. However, I have watched the conditions of NYCHA become deplorable. Thank you. With repair tickets that take months to address, ongoing damage to ceilings and walls due to consistent leaks, bathrooms covered with mold that affect the family's health, and improper treatments. Residents continue to experience issues with trash throughout the development, large bulk garbage in front of the buildings, which leads to infestation of rats and rodents. We have a scaffolding that's been put around our building for over 24 months with no work taking place. Wow. Has accumulated trash and debris on top of it with inconsistent cleaning, and it's affecting the quality of life. Now NYCHA has implemented what they are calling an AWS plan, which stands for Alternative Work Schedule. This means that the maintenance workers that we had coming daily to clean out 20 buildings in Lincoln Development will not be doing daily cleanings. The repairs will be taking even longer to fix. This whole situation and this issue is patronized by the statement of, it's just the projects. The residents are afraid to speak up for frustration and fear of retaliation by NYCHA. I have to speak up.
That's right.
Because if you don't, nothing gets done.
Right.
I'm speaking up towards this situation because I can no longer be afraid to speak.
Right.
I can no longer basically stand the situation that I'm in. I love where I live at, and it needs to become better. I'm not asking, I'm demanding that it becomes better. Thank you. So, I would like to introduce Mr. Jumaane is an advocate, elected official, who's brought the tenants' rights throughout his career. His first community organizer, then was elected official, thank you, official, and chair of the Council Housing and Building Committee. I am proud to introduce him and discuss the year's Worst Landlords list. And how he will hold these bad landlords accountable through legislation and organization. Now I'm pleased. Mic check. Mic check. Mr. Our public advocate, Jumaane D. Williams.
Give it up for our tenant leader, please. Give another round of applause. I say tenant, you say power. Tenant. Power. Tenant. Power. I say tenant, you say power. Tenant. Power. Tenant. Power. All right, thank you all organizations for being out here today. Thank you for our Attorney General for showing up and being out here. We're gonna hear from her as well as my colleagues in the state and the city in a little bit. And today we are here to announce again the worst landlords in the city. I thought it was vital to carry on this annual list to shine a spotlight on the worst landlords. I have, as mentioned, been a tenant organizer, a community organizer, housing chair of the city council, and now as public advocate, I want to make sure I continue to amplify and lift the voices of the people of this city whose voices aren't being heard, and tenants who are suffering because of the worst landlords in our city. The Worst Landlords Watchlist spotlights the top 100 most egregiously negligent landlords in New York City as determined by widespread and repeated violations. And looking at the data, and looking at buildings and speaking with tenants, we have seen the real human costs of negligence. We are highlighting the landlords because of the impact they have on hundreds of thousands of tenants every single day. It is cold outside today, but for some tenants, it's cold every single day, even when they're in their homes. We've seen dangerous conditions, mold, rodents, electrical problems, lack of heat or water, and we've seen the worst perpetrators. Hoping you make sure you see some of the pictures that are here. People are paying rent to live here. And as was the first time last year, NYCHA is our worst landlord. NYCHA is in a league of its own, so much so we can't put it on the main list. They are in the Hall of Fame of bad landlords. Almost 100,000 more work orders year over year, an average of 300,000. Just last month, over 300,000. This is after a new monitor and a new chair. So we'll talk about NYCHA in a second. But we want to go to the private landlords that are the worst. And so I'm going to do it by mic check as well. Y'all ready?
Ready.
Mic check.
Mic check.
Mic check.
Mic check.
The number 5.
The number 5.
Worst landlord.
Worst landlord.
Christy Angeles.
Christy Angeles.
Average of
Average of
978 violations.
978 violations.
The number 4.
Number 4.
Worst landlord.
Worst landlord.
Abdul Khan.
Abdul Khan.
Average of 1,135 violations.
Average of 1,135 violations.
The number 3.
Number 3.
Worst landlord.
Worst landlord.
Eric Silverstein.
Eric Silverstein.
Average of 1,144 violations.
1,144 violations.
The number 2.
Number 2.
Worst landlord.
Worst landlord.
Nathan Montgomery.
Nathan Montgomery.
Average of 1,581 violations.
1,581 violations.
And the number 1.
Number 1.
Worst landlord.
Worst landlord.
Jason Korn.
Jason Cole.
Average of
Average of
2,877 violations.
2,877 violations.
I hope everybody got that. Almost 3,000 average open violations. That means sometimes he was higher, sometimes he was lower. Jason Korn, I believe, was maybe number 9 or number 3 last year, if I remember correctly. But he strove to be number 1, and he succeeded. Jason Korn is the worst landlord. I want people to understand, because sometimes the landlords will come to us and say there's been some mistakes here and there. Even if there were some mistakes, 3,000 is a number that anybody should be ashamed of.
Exactly.
Eric Silverstein, I believe, was number 1 last year. He's number 3. Not because he's any better, but we have landlords who are now worse. That's the story here. People are not moving down because they've gotten better. People are just getting worse. Jason Korn has 16 buildings on our list, 700 units, and an average of, as I said, 2,177 open violations a month over the last year. Those are the worst individual landlords in the city. But there's one landlord, as I mentioned, who gets a special rating at the top, and that is NYCHA. The city should not get away with having 290,000 open work orders over the last year. November, 340,000.
Wow.
340,000 more than last year. This last month alone, which is more than 100,000 over last year. This year, as we reveal the list, I want to talk about how to fight to create change around the people who are on it. Joining me today are elected officials and tenants, and that's fitting because there are 2 ways to take these worst landlords on: in our laws and in our streets, legislation and organization. Those 2 areas have been critical in reshaping and continue to reshape the office of the public advocate, and they've been critical in creating change. In putting together this list, we've seen how landlords try to get off of it. And I hate to say it, it's not by being better landlords. It is because they self-certify repairs without city certification. They transfer ownership among different individuals within the same entity. They treat fines as the cost of doing business. We are pursuing legislation to prevent them from evading accountability. But that's only half of the change we need. We need political will and power, but we also need tenant power. I've seen the tenant movement grow for decades. thanks to many of the people here, and I'm here to say that tenants who have found their landlord on today's list, it's time to organize. The organizations here today can help, and I know a thing or two about organizing myself. After this rally, I'm headed to the buildings of some of the worst landlords on this list to shine a light on what they've been doing in the boroughs across the city. If there's one thing I've learned in that time about tenants, in the 20 years I've been doing this, is we make noise and we make change across buildings, across blocks, and across boroughs. I say tenant, you say power. Tenant, power. Tenant, power. I say tenant, you say power. Tenant, power. Tenant, power. The tenant power is here to stay. We are going to make sure those landlords are shamed, embarrassed. We're going to reach out to their mortgage holders so that they know that they are violating the mortgage, that every mortgage that has something in it, a decree that they have to hold these buildings to the warranty of habitability, and they've been violating that. Take notice right now. We are going to your lender to let them know what's going on. And my hope is at some point, these owners lose their property, or some of them need to spend some time in the cell. So we're going to hear from a tenant, another tenant, and then we're going to hear from our Attorney General, Kim Statudo, 1550 Selwyn Avenue. The Bronx has not had gas for over 14 months. Her landlord is Abdul Khan. Let's give it up for her, please. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm sorry. This is what I was left with. Just take a note of this. My name is Kim Statudo. I'm a CASA leader and a tenant leader of the 1515 Selwyn Avenue Association. I have lived at 1515 Selwyn Avenue for 26 years, where our landlord is Abdul Khan, who is being named as the 5th worst landlord in the city for 2019. In 2016, my landlord, Abdul Khan, decided to convert the boiler from oil to gas heating. He did the conversion without proper permits or licensed plumbers. Abdul Khan put 47 families' lives in jeopardy, including the entire block, by his illegal conversion. We were a sitting time bomb, waiting to explode, and yet he has not been held accountable for his illegal actions. There are 244 open violations in my building right now. 210 of them are hazardous. He has not complied with court orders to do repairs, and I was forced to give 4 access dates, 4 different times, and the work is still not complete. Section 8 is threatening to terminate their contract with Khan because of his negligence, which will make families lose their homes, and then continues to harass tenants for rent. We demand that HPD sues the landlord in housing court to get warrants to remediate all hazardous conditions in the building. We demand that the city takes 1515 Selwyn Avenue from Abdul Khan and help us put it in a nonprofit ownership. And lastly, but not least, we demand that the Attorney General office does an investigation of Abdul Khan's entire portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you. Give it up, give it up. And just very briefly, just recently we lost an awesome tenant leader named Carmen Rivera from CASA. We're going to take a moment of silence for Carmen.
Unexpected.
Thank you. We know her spirit is here, holding these landlords accountable. Next, we'll hear from someone who knows a little bit about this list and is now doing some fierce work in our state's capital. And I'm looking forward to speaking with her about what we can do to continue to hold these landlords accountable. Next up, our Attorney General, Tish James.
I want to thank Public Advocate Jumaane Williams and all of my colleagues here today for their commitment to this issue, and I want to thank all of the advocates and organizers for their tireless work. The Landlords Watchlist would not be possible without all of you, because we all know that far too many landlords in this city think that they can subject tenants to uninhabitable conditions in the city of New York to basically improve their bottom line. And so this really is a notice to all bad landlords that the public advocate may have changed, but the list remains the same. And to no one's surprise, once again, NYCHA is atop of this year's list. And even with the oversight of a new monitor and a new chair, conditions at NYCHA have only gotten worse. And outstanding work orders for critical maintenance have exceeded 350,000 work orders. In my office, as all of you know, we've taken action in a lawsuit to hold NYCHA accountable for this, and we will continue to use every tool at our disposal to hold them accountable. And on top of the private's worst landlord list, we have Jason Korn, who has allowed hundreds of units of buildings across Brooklyn and Manhattan to fall into great disrepair. In addition to Mr. Korn, you've got Nathaniel Montgomery, and Eric Silverstein, and Abdul Khan, and Chris DeAngelis, and Joseph Salamani, and Richard Nussbaum, and Nathan Silverstein, and Michael Lazaroff, and Mark Treese. These are all the worst landlords in the city of New York, the top 10. But I think it's most important that we never forget the names and the faces of those living in these horrible conditions, hardworking New Yorkers who under law are entitled to habitable conditions. They're seniors, they're children, they're working families. These are people who have been forced to live without heat and hot water, and on days even colder than today. They've had their bathrooms gutted for no apparent reason. They have apartments overrun with rodents and mildew and mold. And that is why this list and the work of the public advocate and the attorney general is so critically important, to hold these bad landlords accountable, to expose them for the horrific conditions that they force New Yorkers to live in, and to actually force them to change and to continue to perpetuate poverty. Because, my friend, shame works. Shame the landlords. Shame the banks. Shame the investors. Shame them, because they turn a blind eye to the conditions upon which individuals live in. They turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to how the other half lives. And we will not go silently into the night. We will continue to raise our voices, because I know the power of this list, and I know that shame works. And I can recall, as the public advocate of the city of New York, landlords running to my office to try to fix the problems in the building to avoid being on the list.
That ain't changed.
Are they still running?
Yeah.
Landlords who basically do not want to be on the list, who do not want to be put on blast, landlords who do not want to be shamed, or the money people behind them. And so I am so glad to stand here and join with my colleague Jumaane Williams as he carries on this tradition. I'm also proud of the fact that in the state legislature this year, our office was responsible for a bill that will now hold landlords criminally responsible. No, I don't think you heard me. Criminally responsible. We will now hold landlords criminally responsible for the most egregious form of tenant harassment. That was a bill that was passed by the state legislature. There's my colleague in the back. Go get them, he's going to court right now. And as a result of those actions, landlords will no longer deprive tenants of living in these conditions. And I will join with the public advocate and all my colleagues here in government to redouble our efforts and to use the law as a means of holding these landlords accountable. And so I want to thank Jumaane Williams for all that he is doing, because he understands and he recognizes and he appreciates that when we organize and that we continue to fight, that we will always continue to fight, because we recognize that housing is a right. And as the speaker who asked before me indicated, or who suggested before me, that the Office of Attorney General should look at the portfolio of these landlords, I can tell her rest assured that there's a new sheriff in town, and we're already looking at their portfolios. Thank you so much.
Give it up for our Attorney General. And if I didn't make it clear for the reporters, we only counted B and C violations. We didn't even count A violations. We only counted the worst of the worst. A C violation has to be cured within 24 hours. Wow. And so I just want people to understand how bad you have to be on this list. Next up, we'll hear from Kathy Ann Lewis, 250 East 29th Street. Her landlord is Jason Korn, mold and no heat for months. Kathy Ann. Chair? All right, we're gonna hear. Have y'all been paying attention to Albany? And the victories we've had in Albany? And the true blue state center that we had? Well, I want to call up the chair of housing, State Senator Brian Kavanaugh.
Thank you very, very much. It is a great pleasure to be here today in this cold day during the holidays. Notwithstanding the terrible conditions that we're talking about here today, it is a very great thing to see that we have this tradition continue. Jumaane Williams, of course, has been a tenant leader in all of his work over many years. First as an activist and advocate, then of course with his tremendous work at the City Council, and now as our great public advocate. And it's also, of course, great to follow Tish James, who who inaugurated this list, who kept it going for so many years, and used that office to shine a spotlight on the horrible conditions that we see around the city that people need to suffer through. And now, as the Attorney General, both through direct enforcement action, through her great public statements, and also through work with the legislature on the bill she mentioned, and also working with us on the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act, really has helped us to have hope that we really can finally turn the corner on these conditions. So again, let's give both of them another round of applause. Now, we had a big year in Albany. We had a big year. We started the year with a very big fight on our hands to eliminate many of the loopholes that have made the rent stabilization system fail to serve its basic purpose of ensuring that people can live securely in their homes and communities in a home they can afford. But we also took steps statewide to make sure that tenants have new tools available to fight eviction and to hold their landlords accountable. And we succeeded in that because, as Jumaane mentioned, we had some elections that really mattered. We turned the state Senate to a Democratic Senate. It's the first time in many decades we've had Democrats in the Senate and the Assembly and the Governor's Mansion. But we also succeeded because tenants in the city and the many great organizations here, like CASA, and I saw Legal Aid here, and many other organizations, focused the power of tenants on making the laws stronger. And we succeeded in a very great way in June. But we know that the best laws in the world are not going to solve this problem unless we have two other things. One is real enforcement of these laws. We need our housing agencies at the state level, at the city level, everybody with the power to enforce laws, like the great Attorney General, to get into the details of what's going on in these buildings, identify ways that these landlords are breaking the law when they force people to live in these bad conditions, and do something about it. The other thing we need, of course, is continued tenant power. We need that here in our communities. We need tenants who are willing, as some of the brave tenants have done here today, to stand up, identify conditions, call out their landlords, and organize their neighbors and get change in their buildings. And we also need continued tenant advocacy to strengthen our laws, to end homelessness in our city, to make sure that everybody in our state, in the city of New York and the state of New York, have a right to a decent, affordable home in their community. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you everybody who's assembled here for this important cause, and let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Give it up again for State Senator Brian Kavanaugh. Next we'll hear from